All right. I think we'll start just to stay on time. Um, my mom figured out how to wave to me, so that's good. Hi, Mom. Um, thanks, everybody, for being here. Thanks a lot for taking part in this two-part webinar series on Mexican gray wolves. I hope this finds you and your families safe and healthy this evening. We have some really special guests presenting, and I'm excited to get into their presentations. So I'll just kick us off, and then we'll move into the presentations. My name's Amy Harwood, and I'm the coordinator for Lobos of the Southwest, a collaborative outreach and education project that comes together with many groups and individuals who all work together to protect Mexican gray wolves. I'm joining you all from Tucson, which is on unceded Tohono O'odham land. And today we're going to be speaking about the recovery effort of Mexican gray wolves, which is currently happening throughout the traditional homelands of the Apache, Hopi, Dene, Havasupai, and Puebloan tribes, as well as several other tribes on this side of the Mexico-US border. Mexican wolf recovery is also happening in Tarahumara, Tewa, and other tribal homelands on the Mexico side. There are people coming together here this evening from all over the United States, which is really exciting. And if you're not aware of the indigenous connection to the land that you're calling in from, I hope you'll take some time after this webinar and find that out. Before I introduce our presenters, I want to let you know a few things. We'll be taking questions in the Q&A section. So if you're on your computers, there's an option at the bottom of your screen likely that will open up a Q&A box, and you can submit your question. And at the end of the presentation, we'll go through those questions for the presenters to respond. We're expecting the presentations to be finished within the hour, and then we'll continue questions for a little while from there. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted online afterwards, so you'll be able to share it with anyone who wasn't able to join. And then you can also change the view of the speakers on your own screen by choosing the gallery or the speaker view. It's often up in the upper right-hand corner, and if you need help, you can ask that as a question, and we can try to help you. All right, so why are we here today? And I talked a little bit about this last week, but I'm going to recap again this evening for those of you who weren't there last week. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service issued a request for comments last month, and that began a 60-day period for the public to provide input on the proposed changes to the 10J management rule. This rule directs a lot of aspects of how the Fish and Wildlife Service fulfills its obligation to recover the Mexican gray wolf to a sustainable wild population. And the comment period is in response to a scoping letter. And that scoping letter outlines the process that the agency is going to go through to make these changes. So presumably we're at the beginning of that process. And this is an opportunity for the agency to find out what the public's concerns are early on. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is responsible for implementing the Endangered Species Act. And as most of you know, this is a very powerful law that's intended to protect threatened wildlife and plant species from extinction. The Fish and Wildlife Service uses a very particular management tool, which is listed under the section 10J of the ESA, which is where it gets its name. When a species is being reintroduced to a landscape that it was wiped out from. So it gives the Fish and Wildlife Service more flexibility, which is not always a good thing, to adapt the Endangered Species Act regulations to better fit the demands of bringing a species entirely back from the brink of extinction. And under that part of the law, the agency also has to come up with some kind of guidance that's specific to what that species needs in that location. So the service actually tried to make changes to the 10J rule in 2015, but the changes were really not very adequate, and they could have led to a very bleak future for Lobo recovery. Fortunately, several conservation organizations sued the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for not fulfilling their obligation, and the court agreed with the groups. U.S. District Court Judge Jennifer Zips came back with an order for the Fish and Wildlife Service to redo the process of changing the management rule. And specifically, she called out that they had not done a good enough job of interpreting the best available science. So that's pretty strong language, and it was a real victory for Lobos and for those of us who advocate for them. So that's kind of where we're at right now. It's taken a few years for the process to get reinitiated, but we're here now. In the first webinar, we talked about the first 22 years of this recovery process. And tonight we're going to look at what is the current status and what do we think we can get from this rule change that's in front of us. We have three presenters with us who will each speak on different dimensions of those things. We'll start out with a current status overview of the species with Roz Switzer. Roz coordinates the Phoenix Pactivist Group and is a broadband leader for Great Old Broads for Wilderness. From there, we'll have Emily Wren, the Executive Director of Grand Canyon Wolf Recovery Project, talk about the need for Lobos north of the current I-40 boundary. And then Chris Smith, the Southern Rockies wildlife advocate with Wild Earth Guardians, will speak to several of the other outcomes we hope to gain from this rule change and for the future of Lobo recovery. I'll wrap up with a few hot tips on how to write a really strong and effective letter for your comments to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then we'll open it up to questions. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the torch over to Roz, and we'll begin the presentations.